At first, Chad Arnold thought he had some sort of skin disease because he itched all the time. Then his eyes and his skin began to turn yellow. He went for a checkup, and he knew that something was terribly wrong when the doctor called him back in and asked, "Do you want your wife to be here with you?" Chad had a disease called PSC, which targets the bile ducts inside and outside of the liver. PSC, the bile ducts grow so inflamed and scarred that they become blocked, causing bile to build up in the liver and eventually seep into the bloodstream, which causes skin to itch. As cirrhosis advances, the abdomen and feet may swell and liver failure sets in. It's a terrifying prognosis for a newly married man in the prime of his life. But PSC is a slow-developing disease, and individual symptoms can vary greatly. So, Chad watched his diet, he swam laps over lunch, he went in for checkups, and he lived his life. Chad traveled the world leading teens on church mission trips and built a successful career doing marketing work for Christian organizations. He'd lose weight sometimes or feel fatigued, but somehow he maintained and was able to go on. In early 2009, he moved his wife and 2 young children to Castle Rock, Colorado, and took a job at Compassion International, an organization that helps poor children around the world. The move came just in time. He lived near the University of Colorado Hospital, where the world's first liver transplant was performed in 1963. In February, just after they moved there, everything changed. Chad was in El Salvador on a business trip about to fly home when his left leg swelled up so much that he couldn't see his ankle. He phoned his brother Ryan, who had studied medicine and had become, alongside their father, an orthodontist back in their hometown of Watertown, South Dakota. "Just get back and get to your doctor," his brother said. "It's got to be related to your liver." So that's what he did. Things went downhill quickly after that. By the time that Chad was back in Colorado, the swelling had moved into his stomach. A transplant became his only chance for survival. Chad had hoped to wait for a cadaver transplant, but at any given time, close to 16,000 patients nationwide await a liver transplant, while only 4,500 cadaver livers become available each year. His best option instead was a living donor transplant. Chad's doctor said he'd need to find someone between 18 and 55 years old, a person in excellent medical and psychological health whose blood type was compatible. They started a search process among Chad's family and friends, but the search didn't last very long. Not because no one was willing, but because someone immediately stepped up. His brother, Ryan. Back in Watertown, as soon as he heard, he scheduled his own blood test. And when he learned what his blood type was, that it was compatible with Chad, to him, the message was clear. The transplant was going to happen, and Chad was going to get better, and Ryan was going to be the donor, period. End of story. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone's going to know that you are my disciples if you love one another. It's the beginning of Passover celebration, and Jesus was eating with his disciples. Do you know how the meals you eat on special occasions are different somehow? I mean, some of it's the food. You fix things that are special and unique, and you fix a lot of them. That makes things different too. But probably you could just have a normal meal on Thanksgiving or Christmas, and because all of the feet are under the table, it makes it different, doesn't it? It makes it more special. That must have been what it was like for them. Passover was a big deal. And these 13 men were celebrating it together when all of a sudden Jesus gets up from the table and comes back with a towel wrapped around his waist. He bends down, starts to wash their feet. He was already their teacher, but they had also started to think that he was the one, the promised Messiah, the future king. And so to see him bend down and wash their feet was shocking and bewildering. They didn't understand. And even when he was done, they still didn't get it. It wouldn't make sense, well, at least for 3 days. The time it would take for him to be crucified and resurrected. For at least a handful of them, it would take even longer than that. And we understand that, don't we? It's been 2,000 years, and sometimes I forget the deep truth of it. Maybe you do too. God is love. God is holy, yes. Powerful, no doubt. His wisdom is inexhaustible, and his creativity knows no bounds. But first, last, and everything in between, God is love. And Jesus came to make sure we know exactly what that looks like. Like a man who defined greatness not by popularity or acclaim, but by serving others. Like a king who, rather than sitting on a throne, instead chose to die on a cross. And so that night, he washed their feet. And then he told them, now it's your turn. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone is going to know you are my disciples if you love one another. I sat in Jim and Peggy Glass's kitchen last night and prayed with Peggy. Jim passed away yesterday. It was a hard moment. Peggy had been his nurse through the worst of it, and he died literally with her arms around him. Loving him, serving him. Of course, if you know Jim, you know he did that too. Jim was deeply involved in our prison ministry. So deeply, in fact, that he stopped seeing the men that he taught as criminals that needed teaching, but instead as brothers that needed love. He loved them so deeply that he opened not just his heart, but his home to them. An open invitation for them to come and to live with him if they needed to. Think about that. But then Jesus said it, didn't he? Love one another. As I have loved you, you have to love one another. And by that, everybody's going to know if you love one another. It's not a lot more complicated than that. It's not always easy, we know that. But it's not particularly complicated. Love. That's what this is about tonight and tomorrow and Sunday. And not just these special days, but every day. Jesus didn't give us a new command for 3 days a year or for the time it takes to complete KOG to ILM. Jesus gave us a 24/7, 365 for life opportunity to experience what God intended life to be like all along. God loves us so much. He would do anything for us. Anything. Including show us with his death on the cross not only what matters to him, but also that the way to eternal, abundant life looks the same for us when we love like he loves. If things had gone the way they were supposed to, Chad and Ryan would have both recovered strongly and well. In just weeks, Ryan's liver and Chad's transplanted liver were supposed to regenerate and grow back to a normal size, providing long-term regular function for both of them. But things didn't go the way they were supposed to for Ryan. There were complications almost immediately after he offered part of his liver. 4 days after surgery, Ryan died from those complications, leaving behind a wife and 3 young children and a very grief-stricken brother whose life had been saved. Chad was still in the hospital recovering from the transplant surgery when his father walked into his room and told him the news. As you can imagine, the grief and the guilt were intense for him. Ironically, it has been Ryan's wife, Shannon, the high school sweetheart that became his wife, that has helped him the most. Ryan was a man with a huge heart, always helping others, always the guy that you called when you needed somebody to talk to, always giving himself away. But the one he gave himself to more than anybody else was his wife. Later, when all was said and done, she took a picture of Chad and Ryan to him that Ryan had kept on his desk at home. They were just boys. They were hugging. They were laughing. And the word at the top of the frame said simply, brothers. But the picture was a note. What has really been kind of a comfort to me isn't trying to see God's hand in this, because I don't yet. It's not even in the memories yet. It's the absolute knowing that I know what love is. What it's like to be adored. What it's like to be completely cared for and protected. If I would have said no to Ryan's love for you, I would have been denying who he was, and I would have been denying what made him such a gift to me. I do not understand his death, but I most certainly understand his life. It was all about love. And I have nothing but gratitude for having experienced its depths. Tonight, tomorrow, and in the days to come, I hope we'll experience that too. The depths of God's love for us. The God who became flesh. The God who stoops down and washes our feet. The God who died on a cross to break the power of sin and death. That God loves us so much. And may that love set the example that we follow with our own. Amen.